Hey guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today we're tackling another Goliath of the gun world, the FN SCAR 16S. Gun which has actually been kind of controversial the last couple of years. So let's go ahead and talk about the history of the FN SCAR, the SCAR program, and see how I have mine set up. And real quick, I want to give a big thank you to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia. That's where I did the testing for this, as well as some matches over the years. So if you're in the DC metro area, please check them out. So getting into the history on the FN SCAR, we actually have to go back to the beginning of the global war on terror. So this is around the 2001 timeframe, after Special Operations Command sent troops, primarily Green Berets, into Afghanistan prior to the large invasion which followed. They started having issues with the M4 rifles that were being issued at the time, and that was primarily due to the way that those rifles were employed and not necessarily the way that they were designed. So they did have some minor QC issues, but they really pushed the rifles beyond what they were designed to do, primarily with rate of fire. So they'd be doing mag dump after mag dump, and that was part of their drills on how to break contact. And the M4 barrel, the original M4 barrel, was not designed to handle that rate of fire, so they had barrels bursting, stuff like that happening with that. Now, due to the way that military procurement works in the US, they couldn't just upgrade the M4 with a heavier barrel. They actually had to get a sign-off from the Big Army to be able to do that, which the Big Army was not interested in doing at the time. So SOCOM, with their billions of dollars in funding, decided to start their own program called the Special Operations Combat Assault Rifle Program to figure out a new rifle to replace the M4 in their inventory, which can handle the way they actually use their weapons. Now, for the SCAR trials, you actually had a couple of different entrants. Of course, we'll talk about FN and their entrant into the SCAR program, which would, of course, go on to win. Then Colt also had two different rifles which they submitted to the SCAR program. And then famously, the final one is going to be this guy here, the Robinson XCR, which was ejected from the program for not having a BFA delivered with it. So this guy got ejected, which was pretty controversial and still is to this day. But that really left you with the FN entrant as well as the two Colts. Now, some of the things that they were looking for in the SCAR program was a rifle that could first handle the rate of fire that they were looking for, would have the park's longevity to be a slight upgrade to the M4, as well as have the modular design that would be a longer term kind of project for the government so they could continue to upgrade it throughout the years. One other thing that the SCAR program entailed was they wanted to have an intermediate caliber rifle from the beginning, so that would be the SCAR 16 in 5.56. However, at least on paper, they wanted to have an additional battle rifle caliber version of their SCAR platform. So that's where this guy comes in. This is a SCAR 17, or in military parlance, a SCAR H. And this is a .308 caliber big brother to the SCAR 16. And to date, this is actually the more popular of the two calibers of the SCAR. And after multiple years of testing, the FN entrant into the contest was decided to be the winner. In around 2009, about 600 of the SCAR L, so the 5.56 version of the SCAR, were delivered to a battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment, and they were the first combat unit to actually deploy with the SCAR L. And in 2010, the SCAR L was finally adopted by Big SOCOM as the Mark 16, and its big brother, the SCAR H, was adopted as the Mark 17. Now, within just a couple of months, though, the Mark 16, the 5.56 version, was pretty much unadopted by SOCOM. And this was largely due to the kind of impression that the SCAR 16 really didn't offer any major advantages at this point over the M4, which had eventually been improved. The barrel issues were finally ironed out with a new SOCOM barrel profile, so they really didn't see a reason to upgrade to the 16. Now, the 17 was kind of a different story because that did offer them a .308 battle rifle, which at the time, most .308 rifles that they had access to were either an M14, which is extremely outdated in ergonomics as well as pretty much all of its features, as well as the SR25, which is fairly okay, but some of the early ones had some issues. And there was one additional variant of the SCAR that was adopted by the US military and SOCOM, and that was the Mark 20 SSR, which was a sniper rifle variant of the SCAR, had a longer receiver, and was really optimized for accuracy. Despite the SCAR 16 not having a long life in the US military, it actually has been adopted by quite a few countries around the world, and primarily by special forces or police units. So anywhere from the Middle East to Eastern Asia to South America, Europe, all over the place. We have countries that have small units, so special forces units, who have adopted the SCAR 16 in some form. Now, there are a couple of standing militaries who have also adopted the SCAR platform. The biggest one, of course, is Belgium, so they adopted the SCAR, and of course FN is a Belgian company, and that is going to be replacing the FN FNC. And then the Portuguese also adopted the SCAR as their main military rifle. And even up to today, you're still seeing these pop up in combat zones. Great example being in Ukraine. A lot of SCARs got adopted over there, so they do pop up fairly frequently in pictures of Ukrainian forces, whether it's their International Legion troops coming from around the world or their own domestic troops. On the US civilian market, there's been a couple of different models of the SCAR. So mine, of course, is the SCAR 16S, and then the 308 version is going to be the SCAR 17S. There's also the SCAR 20S, which is that Mark 20 SSR length gun with a longer receiver, and that can be chambered in either 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor. More recently, FN has released the SCAR 15P, so that is a pistol form version of the SCAR, and that comes with a 7.5-inch barrel. They have a 5.56 and now a 300 blackout model, and that was based off the military SCAR PDW, so that's really the short length one with a retractable stock. So really cool setup, but yeah, again, there's multiple different versions of the SCAR that you can get. They also come in this fantastic flat dark earth, or 50 shades of FDE as people like to call it, because all the parts are different color, because it's really hard to color match polymer to aluminum anodizing, and different runs have different colors. But of course you also have just a standard black rifle. And that's a good overview of the SCAR history. So we could go into some pretty big deep dives into this guy, but in the interest of time, let's go ahead and start looking at how I have mine set up. All right, so starting from the front, I do have a Chemo muzzle device on here, and of course this is an SBR SCAR with the factory 10-inch barrel on it. This is also a fantastic suppressor host, so we'll be talking about that later on. And speaking of that, we also have a gas plug here in the front, an adjustable gas plug that has both suppressed and unsuppressed settings, and that works very, very well. And a built-in iron sight, front iron sight on the gas block, so that folds up and down, very, very nice. As far as my front sling swivel goes, it is a QD mount from Kinetic Development Group, so that's a pretty big upgrade over the original, just standard like loop type sling mount that comes on the stock SCAR. And then I also have Parker Mountain Machine rails on all sides of the rifle, and these are all M-LOK, which is a good upgrade over the original Picatinny rails. And moving back to the optic, I do have a SIG Romeo 8T, which is an absolutely bomb-proof and also very heavy optic, but great red dot sight, and I am running an EOTech magnifier behind that currently. And this is the rear iron sight for the SCAR, so these do come with both the front and rear iron sights, and they're both very good quality. There is a sling swivel there in the back, just a ring, and then you can see our ejection port. Nothing too crazy, an AR-15 style magazine release, as well as an AR-15 style 45-degree selector lever. And then on my 16S at least, I do have a Geisley trigger on it, so that is a pretty big upgrade over the stock SCAR trigger. And then this is a SCAR magazine, however it is compatible with most AR-15 style magazines, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Moving back to the stock, the old UGG boot that everyone loves to hate on, quite a few features on this. We'll see more when we get to the other side. All right, and checking out the other side of the rifle, not a whole lot to see up front, so pretty much the same thing. We have our muzzle device and our gas system, as well as that front sight. We do have that sling swivel on this side, as well as the rail panels. And moving back, the charging handle is actually aftermarket. That's a GG&G offset charging handle, which gets your knuckles out of the way of the optic, which is very, very nice to have. The screws on the side here are for removing your barrel. It's the 2 screws there, as well as the front screw here. On both sides, you remove those, or back them out at least, and your barrel will be pulled. Then you can go ahead and get a look at our optic again here on this side, as well as our rear sight. Mine is a Belgian SCAR 16S, so the American-made ones are generally going to be the non-reciprocating model nowadays. Mine is an older reciprocating model for the charging handle. And again, we have more AR-15 style controls on the left side of the rifle, the standard ping pong paddle and an ambi mag release, as well as a safety selector on the left side as well. Nothing too crazy to see, but moving back here, we have another kinetic development group piece here, and that's going to be that QD sling swivel right there in the back. And then we go back to our UGG SCAR stock. And I do have an upgraded button on here, which is a little bit stronger than the original polymer one. And then you can see the button to raise our cheek weld, as well as a button to adjust the length of pull on the SCAR stock. And let's go ahead and kick off our ratings with accuracy. And the SCAR is going to get a 2 in this category. Using 55 grain GGG Lithuanian ammunition, I was able to get about a 3.6 MOA group with the SCAR 16, which is kind of disappointing, particularly since these generally have a reputation for being fairly accurate. For whatever reason, mine just might not like 55 grain ammunition, but I wasn't able to get stellar accuracy out of this rifle. I even tested it multiple times and got about the same results. And next up, we have Aftermarket, where I'm giving the SCAR 16 a perfect score of 5 because there is a ton of different aftermarket options for this, and you can replace basically every part of this rifle with something aftermarket if you really want to. So starting out with companies that makes parts for it, Kinetic Development Groups is one of the really big ones, and they make a lot of parts. Midwest Industries makes handguards for these. Geisley makes triggers, as well as Timney, and some other companies also make triggers for these. Parker Mountain Machines makes a lot of parts for this, primarily going to be like handguards, stuff like that, and modified pistol grips that work on the SCAR. That's just getting started here. Lingle Industries makes parts. Mototech Engineering makes primarily gas system parts and buffers for the SCAR. And then we also have Imperial Arms Company is going to be a big one because they actually make essentially their own version of the SCAR, since at this point the patent's pretty much dead on the SCAR, so they copied it, and you can buy one of their receivers and build your own SCAR without any FM parts if you really want to. So that is an option there. High Desert Dog builds parts for it. Voltor Deadshot Barrels builds different caliber barrels for the SCAR, the 16 and the 17. F5 Manufacturing does stocks, and then GG&G does a couple of different parts to include the charging handle I have on here. So we already mentioned some of the parts that you can replace on it, but pretty much everything can be replaced by an aftermarket part. You have a ton of different stock options for the SCAR. Biggest one's going to be the KDG. That was very popular for a long time. And then, yeah, pistol grips are one area where it's kind of weird with the SCAR. It's not going to be necessarily compatible with all AR-15 style grips. Some you might have to modify. Grips like this Reptilia CQG will pop onto a SCAR without any problem, but like some Magpul grips, you'll have to modify to fit on the SCAR. Lower receivers are another thing you can swap out. There are aluminum lower receivers that are made for the SCAR, which will accept standard AR-10 style magazines, so your SR-25 magazines. The SCAR uses SCAR mags, which, or at least for the SCAR H, that's what we're talking about here. For the 16, they do make aluminum lowers for it as well. So that is an option, but it really doesn't give you a huge upgrade on the 16 compared to the 17. As far as handguards go, some of the big options are going to be the Kinetic Development Group, so that gives you a more extended handguard that's M-LOK, and then Midwest Industries also gives you a more extended M-LOK style handguard. Also, Picatinny and Keymod options were available in the past from them as well. From Parker Mountain Machines, they actually produce side rails for this, so you can add just the side rails, which is what I've chosen to do with mine to keep the original looking profile, but at least bring it up to the current M-LOK spec. They also do a extension block which goes around the front sight block, so that's another option there if you want to add a little bit more room out here to add accessories. And next up, we're going to talk about durability, where I'm going to give the SCAR a 4. As far as most of the parts on here, they're freaking bomb-proof. The bolt carrier, they're just beefy as all hell. I've heard of very few people breaking bolts on these, breaking barrels, gas systems, anything like that. The one thing on the rifle that people tend to complain about is going to be the stock, and particularly this stock latch here is known to have issues. So for some of the early guns that that SOCOM are using, there were rumors of troops actually carrying around backup stocks because the stock latch was known to break, so you would end up having to pull the stock off and replace it to have a working stock. So that is a known issue. I haven't had that happen on either of my scars, and it's not a very common issue to see pop up nowadays, but that is something to be aware of. Now, one other thing we'll talk about is screw tilt. Now that it has to do with the back plate here at the rear of the receiver. This is an issue particularly with the SCAR 17. With the 16, screw tilt is not really an issue, but it's essentially caused by primarily people changing out to the KDG stock or another one that has a metal attachment plate here at the back. The bolt carrier group would essentially pile into that back plate, and it would actually deform the rear of the receiver and push this back plate out and cause those screws to tilt at the rear of the receiver. Again, that is not an issue at all with the SCAR 16. That's a 17 issue, but that is something that pops up a lot with the SCAR. And the original UGG boot SCAR stock with the polymer attachment here, that actually is meant to absorb some of the recoil there, and that's why it's not an issue on the 17 if you use an original SCAR stock. And one other durability thing I'm at least going to touch on with the SCAR is going to be optic durability. So for the SCAR 16, again, this is not a problem, but the SCAR 17 has been known to be an optic eater, and that's primarily due to the weight of the bolt carrier group. Optics are meant to take recoil in one direction for the most part, and that's coming backwards. However, the weight of the bolt carrier group on the SCAR 17 is extremely high, so it actually slams forward, and you can actually feel it in the recoil impulse of the SCAR 17. But that forward impulse has a tendency to break cheaper optics. Now, things like L-cans or higher quality, newer optics tend to stand up to that pretty well, but they have been known to eat lower quality optics in the past. And next up, we have ergonomics, where I'm going to give the SCAR 16 a 4. So checking out the controls, we're going to go ahead and check out the front here. The first thing we're going to look at is going to be our gas plug. So there are two settings on here. It is suppressed and unsuppressed. Very easy to adjust. You just gotta flick it between the two. When it's to the right here, it is in the suppressed setting. When it's straight up and down, that is the unsuppressed setting. Now, next up, we do have our front iron sight here. To fold that up, you actually have to basically press up on this little button here, and then it'll flip into the up position, so you can see just right there. And then to flip it back down, it is locked in place, so you have to pull back up on that and press it down. You do have an adjustment there for windage, and then for elevation, the front sight post is adjustable. Now, moving back to the charging handle, again, mine is the reciprocating charging handle model made in Belgium. So that is where I'm going to be dropping off a point. The newer US made ones and some of the Belgian ones are going to be non-reciprocating charging handles. So this is one of the biggest complaints for the SCAR for years and years and years. But that has been upgraded with the newer models. Now, as far as the bolt release goes, it is just standard AR-15 ping pong paddle right here. So pretty standard, you just press that in and it sends your bolt home. On the left side, you also have that ambidextrous magazine release, as well as our safety selector, which is 45 degrees and very nice on these. Now, looking at the right side, we just have our standard AR-15 style magazine release, as well as our safety selector, which is ambidextrous. Again, these are the aftermarket switches though from Magpul. And then we'll actually flip the sight to the side back here and give you a look at the rear sight. So you can kind of see in the back here, there's a little bit of a tower. So to adjust the range on it, you flip this tower up and down, and then it gives you your range here in the back. And then windage is adjustable, very adjustable on these through these two drums on either side. And then it also has two different aperture settings. So you can flip that down for a tighter aperture, and then up for more of a CQB style aperture. And then it doesn't lock in place on the rear sight. You can just flip it back like that. Very easy to do. Now, the only other thing we really need to talk about is going to be the stock. So for the cheek riser, very easy to adjust. You just press that in and lift it up. So very easy here. Stock does feel a little bit plasticky and low quality on the SCARs. That's kind of one of the biggest complaints about these. This one actually has an upgraded metal stock release button here, or stock latch. To fold the stock, you just press that in. Then your stock is going to go ahead and come around here and fold underneath your shell deflector here. To unfold it, you just pull down on it, flip it back around, And then for the SCAR in particular, I recommend pressing in the button before you close it, not snapping it shut, just due to some of the durability issues these have had in the past. Now your stock does have 6 different positions on it for length of pull. Very easy to adjust just with the button here at the back of the stock. And that's really all we need to go into for the controls on the SCAR 16. And next up we have maintenance, where I'm going to give the SCAR 16 a score of 4. Now as far as disassembly goes, for the most part it is incredibly easy on this rifle. Everything comes apart pretty well except for the gas system. So getting the gas plug out, very easy. However, getting the piston itself out is a bit of a pain and requires some sort of a tool. There's a couple of different ways to get the piston out. One is with a cleaning rod all the way from the back of the rifle. You'll have to punch it out through the gas block. I actually use a hook style tool to get in some of the holes up here at the front of the receiver to push it out, but it is a bit of a pain to get that piston out. However, once you get that out, everything else is incredibly easy to get to on this rifle. The receiver is incredibly open, so you can very, very easily clean everything out, and it's actually pretty much a joy to maintain. Now, as far as getting OEM parts, they are very expensive on the SCAR and sometimes difficult to get. However, the aftermarket really has been covering down on being able to replace parts on the SCAR lately. So there are a ton of aftermarket replacements if you're not able to find OEM parts for your SCAR. Now, in terms of modularity, I'm going to go ahead and give the SCAR a 4. And that's because you can very easily swap out the stock on this. You can swap out the lower receiver for an aluminum one. You can swap different grips onto these. You can even swap out the barrel to accept different calibers from either Aftermarket or some different barrel lengths from FN. But the biggest issue I have in terms of modularity with the SCAR platform is the receiver itself. So this is a very set receiver length, and it's kind of a dated design as far as that goes. So you have the side panels here for accessories, and you really can't get a replacement handguard. You can just get an extension that will bring the handguard out further and add M-LOK that way. So that is the one area where it's kind of let down on the SCAR platform. Now I do want to touch on magazines real quick. And this is a standard magazine that comes with the SCAR 16. It is a steel Stanag magazine, very well made, heavy duty magazine. And then in the FDE version, it does come in this cool two-toned with the upper part not being painted, but they are quality magazines that work very well, just a bit on the heavy side. Now, other than that, the SCAR 16 works with basically all Stanag style magazines quite well. So this is a Gen 3 Magpul magazine. This works perfectly well in the SCAR 16 without any issues. However, there is one magazine we do need to talk about, and that is the Gen 2 Magpul magazines. So the Gen 2 PMags, if you can see in the top part here behind the follower, it is a different cut than it is on the Gen 3 magazine, where it kind of bows in a little bit towards the bottom, and that actually causes issues on the SCAR 16. So that tends to push up on the bolt hold open and makes it drag on the bottom of the bolt carrier group. So over time, that can cause an issue with the SCAR 16. You can modify the Gen 2 Magpul magazines to cut those bits out with like an X-Acto knife, and it will work then, but I would not recommend using Gen 2 magazines that are not modified because they can damage your gun over the long haul. And next up we have price, where I'm going to give the SCAR a 1. These are historically very expensive rifles, so you're looking at $3,000 plus to get a SCAR 16. Now I will say in recent times these have actually been dropping underneath that price point from time to time for the 16. For the SCAR 15P, the pistol version with the 7.5-inch barrel, those have actually been going for under $2,000 at times, which is a steal for one of those. However, these are still very, very expensive rifles. Now getting into shooting characteristics, I'm going to give the SCAR 16 a full 5. When it comes to the trigger, again, I have the Geisley Aftermarket trigger in my SCAR 16, which is a very, very, very nice trigger with about a 3-pound pull, so very light, incredibly crisp two-stage trigger. The original stock trigger on the SCAR is well known for not being the best. I actually don't mind it that much. I still have the stock trigger in my SCAR 17, and that weighs in a little bit over 7 pounds, so it is a fairly heavy trigger. However, it's pretty smooth or at least on my 17, which has a lot of rounds through it, so it smooths out over time. But I think a lot of the criticism on the SCAR trigger is kind of overblown, honestly. Now, as far as recoil impulse, it's pretty unique on the SCAR platform, particularly on the 17, but even on the 16, you can feel it's different from most rifles. And that's due to the length of travel on the bolt carrier group. There is a ton of movement in this bolt carrier group, and you can really kind of feel it kerchunk back and forward on there. However, that really spreads out the recoil impulse, so it's incredibly smooth and very, very easy to keep on target with this rifle. When it comes to suppression, the SCAR 16 is actually one of my favorite 5.56 rifles. So again, it does have that adjustable gas block with a suppressor setting, and with my full back pressure Saker 7.62 can, this is an incredibly good suppressor host. So I'm getting basically no gas to the face. The recoil is very muted, sounds muted. It's very, very good host. Now, even with a low back pressure can, so my SRBS 7.62 from B&T, you have to run it in the normal setting for it to work. However, again, you're getting the same thing. It's very, very low back pressure. You're not getting any gas coming out of it pretty much whatsoever. The bolt carrier group is moving quite slow, so it's not really speeding it up a whole lot or adding a lot of recoil, so it is an incredibly good suppressor host. And when it comes to reliability on the SCAR 16, I'm giving it a full 5, and I'm not even going to apologize for that. This gun has been absolutely amazing for me. I have never had an issue with my SCAR 16 personally. You even use this at a Zombie 3 gun match a couple of years ago where we actually had some pretty bad weather. So a lot of rain, a lot of mud, and I even got some mud on the SCAR and it was working flawlessly. I saw other people having issues with their ARs and the SCAR powered through pretty much everything I threw at it. So in terms of reliability, I'm very happy with the SCAR 16. And when it comes to weight with the SCAR 16, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 4. My 16 with the 10-inch SBR barrel comes in at about 6.9 pounds, which is fairly lightweight for a modern rifle. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories for the SCAR 16, we come out with a 38, which puts it solidly into the A tier. So some of the high points for the SCAR are going to be the aftermarket support for it, tons of aftermarket parts for this rifle, as well as the shooting characteristics are absolutely fantastic, as well as the reliability for the SCAR platform. Now, where my SCAR is kind of been letting me down a little bit is going to be accuracy, where it only garnered a 2. And then, of course, the price on the SCAR is incredibly expensive compared to some other options. And the final thing that we're going to talk about is how I think the SCAR 16 rates as far as coolness goes. And I'm going to go ahead and put it straight up into the S tier. This is one of the most iconic rifles of the 21st century so far, and you see them pop up all the time in pop culture. So just looking at movies to start out with, Inception, you have the SCAR 16, the Expendable series, G.I. Joe. Pretty much most modern movie series or action movies are going to have the SCAR 16 in it because it is an incredibly cool looking platform that's considered one of the more modern ones out there. And when it comes to video games, we have even more examples of the SCAR 16 popping up. So just looking at Call of Duty or Battlefield, we have multiple games in both series that feature the SCAR 16 pretty prominently. Then you have games like PUBG, Fortnite, you name it, Battlefield, Siege, whatever. They're going to have an example of the SCAR in it, whether it's a 16 or a 17, just because it is one of the most popular rifles of the 2000s and the 2010s, and that's going to shoot it straight up into the S tier. So thank you guys for checking out my video on the SCAR 16. I really appreciate it. Please like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'm hoping to come out with some more cool reviews on cool guns coming up in the near future, so stand by for that.